She was too poor to be a bride, but an Apache saw something else. She stood at the edge of the dusty church steps with her hands folded inside the frayed sleeves of her only good dress, watching the other women gather in soft cotton gowns and pressed boots, their families around them like shields. And even though the bells were ringing and the air was full of hopeful voices, she felt invisible because she already knew how this day would end for someone like her, someone whose pockets were empty and whose name carried no weight. And when the matchmaker finally passed her by without so much as a glance, a familiar ache settled in her chest, the quiet pain of being overlooked yet again. And she remembered the words she had heard whispered too many times to count, that she was too poor to be a bride, that no man would take on the burden of a woman who had nothing to offer but hard work and a tired smile. And though she tried to stand tall, the truth of it pressed against her like a heavy coat, because she had come here with the smallest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would see her as more than a risk. And as the crowd began to thin, she felt that hope slip away, replaced by the familiar resolve to survive on her own, until she noticed the Apache man standing near the fence at the edge of the gathering, watching everything with a calm that made the noise around him seem distant. And when their eyes met, she looked away at first, embarrassed, because she had been taught to keep her gaze down, to not invite attention she could not afford, yet something about his steady presence drew her back. And as she watched him, she realized he was not looking at her clothes or her empty hands. He was looking at her face, as if he were trying to understand something deeper, and that alone made her heart beat a little faster, because no one had ever looked at her that way before. And when he finally began to walk toward her, slow and unhurried, she felt a mix of fear and curiosity, because she did not know what he could possibly want with someone like her. And as he stopped a few steps away and spoke her name, surprising her by knowing it at all, she felt the world tilt slightly, because in that single moment she was no longer just the poor girl on the church steps. She was someone being seen, and she did not yet know what he saw, but she could feel that it was something no one else had bothered to look for. For several long heartbeats after the Apache spoke her name, she could not bring herself to answer, because hearing it said out loud in his calm, steady voice felt strange and powerful at the same time, like a door opening inside her that she had kept shut for too many years. And she wondered if he had made a mistake, if he had meant to call out to someone else, someone with a better dress or a family standing close behind her. Yet when she lifted her eyes, she saw that his gaze was fixed on her alone, patient and certain, and that certainty made her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and hope, because being truly seen was something she had never learned how to handle. And when she finally whispered that he must be mistaken, that she was only a poor girl with nothing to offer, he did not smile or argue. He simply told her that he had been watching her all morning, and that what he had seen was not poverty, but a woman who carried herself with quiet strength, who helped others even when she had little herself. And those words struck her harder than any insult ever had, because they were true, and she had never realized that anyone noticed, and she tried to look away, embarrassed. But he continued gently, explaining that he had seen the way she gave up her place in line to let an older woman be served first, the way she had taken a crying child by the hand and soothed him, the way she had stood alone without bitterness when others were chosen. And as he spoke, memories of her small, unnoticed acts rushed through her mind, and she felt tears gather in her eyes. Because for the first time, someone was speaking about her life as if it mattered, and she told him that kindness did not put food on the table or buy a ring, that a woman like her was a risk no man wanted. Yet he shook his head, saying that he was not looking for a woman who could bring wealth. He was looking for someone who could bring honesty and warmth into his home. And in his people's way, those things were worth more than gold. And as she listened, she felt a strange pull toward him, because his words did not sound like flattery. They sounded like a truth he had carried with him long before he ever met her. And though she was afraid to trust it, a small part of her wanted to believe that perhaps her worth was not measured in coins after all. And as the last wedding guests drifted away from the church steps, leaving behind only dust and fading laughter, she realized that she was standing on the edge of a choice she had never been allowed to make, a choice between the familiar safety of being unwanted and the terrifying possibility of being chosen. And when the Apache quietly asked if she would walk with him for a while, just to talk, she hesitated, her heart pounding. Yet something inside her urged her forward, because even if it ended in disappointment, she did not want to let this moment pass without finding out what he truly saw when he looked at her. When she finally nodded and stepped away from the church steps to walk beside the Apache, it felt as if she were leaving behind not just a place, but an entire version of herself, the one that had learned to stay small, to keep expectations low, and to survive on whatever scraps of attention were left over after everyone else had been chosen. And as they moved along the narrow dirt path that led away from the gathering, she could still hear faint laughter and music behind them, reminders of the life she had never been invited into, yet with every step forward that sound grew weaker, replaced by the quieter rhythm of their boots against the ground and the wind moving through the dry grass. And though neither of them spoke at first, the silence did not feel awkward. It felt careful, as if they were both giving the moment the respect it deserved, and she found herself stealing glances at him, taking in the way he walked with an easy steadiness, not rushed, not tense. And she wondered what kind of life had shaped a man who could look at a poor, forgotten woman and see something worth stopping for. And when she finally asked him why he had come to this town at all, he told her that he had been trading goods along the frontier, that he had learned to move between worlds, yet never truly belonged to any of them. And she felt a quiet kinship in those words, because she too had always been on the edges, never fully claimed by anyone. And as they walked past the last of the houses and into the open fields beyond, the air seemed to change, growing lighter, and for the first time that day, she felt as if she could breathe freely. And he told her about his home far to the west, about the mountains and the rivers and the way his people valued honesty and resilience. And she listened with wonder, because it was so different from the narrow, judgmental place she had always known. And she found herself telling him small things about her own life, about the farm where she had grown up, about the way her parents had died and left her with nothing but memories, and about the long years of being passed from one household to another, always expected to be grateful, never allowed to dream. And he listened to every word without interrupting, without pity, just with quiet understanding. And that made her feel lighter, as if each confession were loosening a weight she had carried alone for too long. And when they reached a small rise overlooking the town, she looked back and realized how small it seemed from a distance, how much of her fear had been built from its narrow streets and narrow minds, and she felt a stirring of something new inside her, something that might one day become courage. And as the Apache stood beside her, gazing out at the horizon, she realized that whatever lay ahead, this walk had already changed her, because it had shown her that there was more to the world and to herself than she had ever dared to imagine. The path curved gently away from the town and toward a low line of cottonwoods where the Apache's small trading camp was set up. And as they walked, she could feel the air grow quieter and less heavy, as if the land itself were easing her shoulders. And when they reached the cluster of simple tents and a neatly kept wagon, she realized that this was the first time in a long while that she had stepped into a space that did not judge her by what she carried or wore, because nothing here was about appearances. It was about survival and respect. And the Apache invited her to sit by a small fire while he prepared tea, moving with a calm, deliberate grace that made the whole place feel safe. And she watched him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, because everything he did was so different from the hurried, demanding way people in town behaved. And when he handed her a warm cup, she held it carefully, savoring the simple comfort of it. And for a moment she forgot about being poor, about being unwanted, about all the labels that had followed her entire life. And she was simply a woman sitting by a fire, being treated with kindness. And that alone felt like a small miracle. And as they talked, she learned more about his life, about the journeys he had taken and the losses he had endured. And she began to see that the quiet depth in his eyes came from having loved and lost just as she had, and that shared pain created a bridge between them that words alone could not build. And when she finally told him how afraid she was to hope, how she had been hurt every time she had believed someone might care, he did not try to convince her otherwise. He only told her that fear was a sign of how much she had already survived, and that perhaps she deserved a future that did not demand she keep suffering to earn it. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and rose, she felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not known in years. And she realized that whatever the town thought of her, whatever they whispered behind her back, there was a part of her that was beginning to believe she might be worthy of more. And as she sat there beside the Apache, sharing stories and warmth, she felt the first fragile thread of something new weaving itself into her life, something that might grow into trust if she was brave enough to let it. The shift in the town's mood was subtle at first, like a breeze that barely rustled the dust in the street, yet the girl could feel it even from the edge of the Apache's small camp, because people had begun to talk, and talk in a place like this was never harmless. It carried assumptions and judgments and the quiet hunger to see someone put back in their place. And as she sat by the fire, sipping the last of the tea he had made for her, she found her eyes drifting toward the road that led back to the town, half expecting to see someone already walking toward them with a look of accusation. And the Apache noticed her unease, asking gently what troubled her, and she admitted that she had lived too long under the weight of other people's opinions to pretend they did not matter, that when a woman was poor, even her happiness was treated like a kind of offense. And he nodded because he understood what it was to be judged before being known. And he told her that the town's fear was not about her, it was about losing control. And those words stayed with her because she realized that by stepping away from the church steps and walking with him, she had already broken an unspoken rule, the rule that said people like her were not allowed to choose. And as the afternoon wore on, a few figures began to appear on the road, men from the town who pretended to be passing by but kept their eyes fixed on her, and the quiet curiosity in their faces soon sharpened into something colder, because they could not understand why she was sitting there calmly, as if she had not been rejected only hours before. And when one of them finally called out, asking what business she had with a stranger, she felt her heart jump. Yet she did not answer right away, because she was tired of explaining herself to people who had never cared, and the Apache stepped forward, telling them that she was welcome here, that she was his guest. And the men laughed at that, because to them she was still just the poor girl on the church steps, someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps she was offered. And the way they spoke made something inside her harden, because she realized that kindness would never be enough to change how they saw her. Only dignity would. And though her voice trembled when she finally spoke, she told them that she had not asked for their permission to sit by a fire or to share a cup of tea, that she was not their possession, and the shock on their faces was almost painful, because they had never expected resistance from someone like her. And as the men muttered and turned away, she felt a rush of fear and pride, because she knew she had just made herself a target, yet she also knew she had done something she could never undo. She had claimed a piece of herself that the town had always denied her, and as the Apache returned to her side, his expression full of quiet approval, she realized that whatever came next, she would not face it alone, and that knowledge made the uncertainty ahead feel just a little less frightening. As the sun slipped lower toward the horizon and painted the land in long bands of amber and shadow, the girl felt the weight of what had just happened settle into her bones, because standing up to the men from town had been the bravest thing she had ever done. And even though they had walked away, she knew their pride had been wounded. And wounded pride in a place like this often turned into something cruel. Yet as she sat beside the Apache and watched the fire crackle and shift, she felt a steadiness growing inside her, a quiet strength that had not been there before. And he told her that courage did not mean being unafraid. It meant choosing to stand even when fear was loud, and those words felt like a gift because she had spent her entire life believing that her fear meant she was weak. And now she was beginning to see that it had simply meant she was human. And as evening deepened and the stars began to appear, she found herself speaking more freely than she ever had, telling him about the loneliness of being unwanted, about the way people had looked through her as if she were made of air, and he listened with the same respect he had shown from the beginning, never interrupting, never judging, just holding space for her truth. And that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. And when she asked him what he saw in her, what had made him walk across the churchyard when everyone else had turned away, he answered quietly that he saw resilience, that he saw a woman who had survived without becoming bitter, and that to him was a kind of beauty no fine dress could match. And those words stayed with her long after he said them, because they offered her a new way of seeing herself, not as poor or unwanted, but as strong. And as the fire burned low and the night wrapped around them, she realized that the town could take many things from her, but it could not take this moment, this feeling of being valued for who she was and whatever happened next, she would carry that with her as a kind of shield against the world. By the following morning, the quiet tension that had been building around the Apache's camp had turned into something heavy and unmistakable, because the town did not like being challenged, and even though no one had yet arrived to confront them openly, the girl could feel that eyes were watching from a distance, measuring, judging, and waiting for the right moment to step in and take back the control they believed they had lost. And as she helped the Apache tend to the small fire and prepare a simple meal, she found herself glancing often toward the road, half expecting to see a group of men appear at any moment, and the fear that stirred inside her was not just for herself, but for him, because she knew how quickly suspicion could turn into violence when someone was seen as different, and the Apache seemed to sense her worry, telling her softly that whatever came, he would not allow anyone to treat her as less than human again. And those words filled her with a quiet courage, because she realized that she was no longer standing alone against the town's cruelty. And when the first man finally appeared on the road, walking toward them with two others behind him, she felt her heart begin to race, because she recognized him as one of the men who had laughed at her on the church steps, and now his expression was not mocking but determined. And as they reached the edge of the camp, he demanded to know why she was still there, why she had not returned to town where she belonged, and the old instinct to shrink and apologize rose in her. But she fought it, because she had learned something important in the last day, that her worth did not depend on their approval. And she told him that she was exactly where she wanted to be, and the way he scoffed made it clear that he did not believe her, because in his world, a woman like her did not get to choose. And the Apache stepped forward then, his presence calm but unyielding, and told the men that she was his guest and that they had no right to harass her. And the men laughed at that, because they saw his kindness as weakness, and one of them reached out as if to grab her arm, and in that instant the line was crossed, because the Apache moved between them, not with violence, but with a quiet authority that made the man freeze, and the girl felt a surge of fear and gratitude all at once, because she realized just how fragile her safety still was, yet she also realized how fiercely it was being defended. And as the men backed away, muttering threats, she knew that this confrontation was only the beginning, and that by choosing to stand with the Apache, she had stepped into a fight she could no longer avoid. But for the first time in her life, she did not feel powerless in the face of it. The men did not go far after they backed away from the Apache's camp, and the girl could feel their presence even when she could no longer see them, like a pressure in the air that refused to lift. Because towns like this did not forget defiance, they collected it, waiting for the moment when it could be punished. And as she sat beside the fire with her hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm water, she realized that by simply choosing where to sit and who to stand beside, she had done something far more dangerous than shouting ever could. She had claimed herself, and that was something the town had never allowed her to do before. And though part of her wanted to run, to disappear into the fields and leave all of this behind, she also knew that running would only confirm what they already believed, that she was weak and easy to move. And the Apache watched her closely, seeing the conflict on her face, and he told her that whatever fear she was feeling was natural, that standing up always came with a cost, but that cost was still less than the price of being erased. And those words struck her deeply, because she had spent so much of her life being erased, treated as if she were not really there, and she did not want to return to that kind of existence now that she had tasted something different. And as the afternoon wore on, the distant sounds of town drifted toward them, voices rising and falling, and she knew they were talking about her, about the poor girl who had dared to sit with an Apache and refuse the role they had assigned her, and she could almost imagine the way they spoke, turning her into a story that fit their anger. Yet she was tired of being someone else's story, and as the shadows lengthened, the Apache prepared a small meal, offering her the first portion without hesitation, and the simple act made her chest tighten because no one had ever put her first before, and she wondered how something so small could feel so powerful. And when she thanked him, he answered that respect was not something to be earned by wealth. It was something every person carried inside them from birth, and hearing that made her eyes sting, because it was a truth she had never been taught. And just as the sky began to turn the soft pink of approaching evening, she saw movement on the road again, more figures this time, and her heart sank, because she knew the town had not finished with them, and as the group approached, their faces set and determined. She stood up beside the Apache, not because she was brave, but because she refused to hide anymore. And when the men stopped a short distance away, their leader spoke sharply, saying that she was needed back in town, that she was causing trouble and shame by staying here, and the words were meant to frighten her, to make her feel small again. But something inside her had changed, and she answered that she had caused no trouble, that she was simply choosing her own path, and the anger in their eyes flared, because a woman who chose was something they could not control. And the Apache added quietly that she was free, that no one had the right to claim her, and in that moment she realized that the fight was no longer just about where she sat or who she spoke to. It was about whether the town would accept that a poor woman could belong to herself, and as the tension hung between them like a drawn blade, she felt fear and resolve twist together inside her, because whatever happened next, she knew she would not go back to being invisible. The men from the town did not raise their voices when they spoke to her, and somehow that made everything feel more dangerous, because calm anger carried a certainty that shouting never could, and as they stood in a loose line in front of the Apache's camp, blocking the narrow road behind them, the girl felt the weight of what they intended press against her chest, because they had not come to argue, they had come to claim. And when their leader told her that it was time to return where she belonged, that she had embarrassed the town long enough, the words cut deep, because she had heard them all her life in one form or another, always reminding her that poverty meant obedience. And though fear rose in her throat, she did not step back, because she had already stepped too far forward to retreat now, and the Apache stood beside her, his presence steady, and told the men that she was not a thing to be taken, that she was a woman who had chosen to stay. And the leader scoffed at that, saying that a woman like her did not get to choose, that she was lucky anyone bothered with her at all, and the cruelty in his voice made something inside her snap, because she realized that this was the moment she had been moving toward all along, the moment when she would either let them decide who she was or finally decide it herself. And she told them, her voice trembling but clear, that she was not lucky to be ignored, that she was not lucky to be unwanted, that she deserved respect just as much as anyone else. And the silence that followed was thick with disbelief, because no one had expected her to speak like that, and some of the men shifted uncomfortably, because her words struck too close to the truth. And the Apache placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not to guide her, but to support her, and she felt a surge of strength from that simple contact, because she knew she was not standing alone. And as the men hesitated, unsure how to respond to a woman who would not bow, she realized that even if they forced her back, they could never force her to believe their lies about her worth again. And that knowledge was a kind of victory all its own. The standoff on the dirt road did not end with a shout or a sudden rush, but with something far more unsettling for the men who had come to claim her, a quiet, unmovable truth that they could no longer bend to their will. And as the leader of the group stared at the girl standing beside the Apache, he began to understand that whatever power he had once held over her was slipping through his fingers, because she was no longer the frightened, invisible woman they had dismissed on the church steps. She was someone who had discovered her own worth, and that was something no threat could erase, and the Apache's steady presence beside her only made that truth more solid, because it was clear that he did not see her as a burden or a favor, but as a person who had chosen to be there. And that choice carried more weight than all the town's gossip and cruelty combined, and when the men finally muttered their anger and turned away, retreating back toward the town that had taught them to control instead of understand, the girl felt her knees weaken with the release of tension, because she had been holding herself together with nothing but will and hope. And as the last of them disappeared down the road, she let out a shaky breath she had not realized she was holding, and the Apache turned to her with a quiet smile that held no triumph, only relief. And he told her that she had been brave, not because she had stood up to them, but because she had refused to believe the lies they had told her about who she was, and those words sank deep into her. Because she realized that what he had seen in her from the very beginning was not just kindness or resilience. It was a spirit that had survived years of being told she was not enough. And as the evening light softened the land around them, she felt something warm and steady grow inside her, a feeling that was not just gratitude, but the beginning of trust. Because for the first time in her life, someone had looked past her empty hands and seen the strength in her heart. And as they walked back toward the small fire together, She knew that whatever the future held, it would be shaped not by poverty or rejection, but by the truth that she was worthy of being chosen, and the truth would carry her farther than any town ever could. Sometimes the greatest transformation does not come from wealth or power, but from being truly seen. And in a world that tried to decide a poor woman's fate for her, one Apache's quiet choice gave her back her voice. This is Redemption West, where broken lives find their way back into the light.